Number 1. The gas station. This is true, and it only happened a few days ago. And honestly, I wasn't really sure what was happening until after it actually happened. I was walking out to a local gas station. I don't keep soda in the house because if I do, I will end up drinking it all. So when I decide I want one, and I can't drink that diet stuff, I just take enough money to buy the soda and nothing else. And then I walk to a gas station that is a little over a mile from my home. Now the day was really hot. Before I went out, I checked the temperature. It was 85 degrees outside, and the humidity was fairly high. The website told me that it felt like it was going to be in the mid-90s outside, so I knew that I was going to be soaked in sweat by the time I got home. But I was still having the craving, so I figured it was worth it. I live in a neighborhood set on the street out of town, so I have to walk into town to get to the gas station. By the time that I made it to the gas station, I was already sweating pretty badly. There were a lot of cars out that day. I was the only person, though, that seemed to be crazy enough to go for a walk. I bought my drink, and then I walked out of the gas station. As I was walking away in the parking lot, I heard someone yelling, "Hey!" really loudly. Now normally, I would not pay any attention to someone yelling out like that outside. I lived in this town for a really long time, but I work at home, so I really don't know many people. However, a memory from before suddenly occurred to me. A couple of years ago, I had an encounter with a homeless person who'd been yelling "hey" at me repeatedly before deciding to attack me. Worried it might be that guy again, and not wanting to be attacked from behind, I turned around and looked back in the direction that I had heard the "hey" come from. Oh, to my relief, it wasn't the homeless guy from a few years before. It was some guy sitting in the passenger seat of a car. There was no one in the driver's seat, so I assumed the driver was inside the gas station. The passenger was sitting slumped down in his seat, his arm leaning on the window pane of the door. His face was partially hidden behind his arm. The guy was talking to me because he continued to address me. "Hey, do you need a ride somewhere?" he yelled at me. He was still keeping his face behind his arm. As is often the case, especially on a hot and humid day, I do always consider taking a ride when it is offered to me. However, more often than not, I will refuse a ride. I mean, you never really know who you're getting into a car with when you get into one with a stranger. So I just waved my hand, told him no thank you, and was about to turn around and leave. As I turned, he said something else to me, but with his mouth still behind the arm, I really couldn't make out what he was saying, so I wasn't sure how to respond to him. I just basically told him, "Thank you," and tried to turn around to walk on my way again. As I turned away from the man, he yelled something at me again. This time he seemed annoyed, however, and slightly on the verge of anger. Sort of as a force of habit, turning back towards a voice when it speaks to you, I turned and looked at the guy. And this time, he had his face up over his arm. And that was when I finally recognized the guy. About 2.5 years ago, I had an altercation with a guy at my gym. He was harassing me in the gym when we were the only 2 people in the gym. This was about 2 o'clock in the morning. After I left the gym, I was walking down to the local Walmart to get a few items. While there, the guy followed me from the gym and tried to attack me in the parking lot. Fortunately, because the guy was so much bigger than I was, I am trained in self-defense. I was able to not only protect myself, but I was able to break the guy's arm too. And to add insult to injury, the guy had his gym membership revoked for harassing me while at the gym. Well, I realized when I had turned around and saw the guy, it was that guy. I suddenly pictured what might have happened if I had gotten into that car. It was a 2-door car, so I wouldn't have been able to get out of it unless he let me. And I might have gotten into the car before I was able to recognize who the guy was. Well, I turned and began walking away from him. I was a bit paranoid, of course, but I was also walking through town on a very busy day. There were a lot of cars out, and a lot of people were out at the businesses. But even so, I was a bit scared as I walked. I crossed a side road and walked into the parking lot of the local liquor store, and while I was turning to walk away across that side road, I noticed the car pulling up behind me slowly, and then it followed me across the street into the parking lot of the liquor store. I was pretty worried at that point. There was no reason for this guy to be following me other than if he was up to something that might hurt me. So I was very nervous and felt some fear despite the environment, which did seem protective. I was wondering if I could get up and into the liquor store before the car could catch up to me. It would be close. It was right then that I got very fortunate, though. Behind the liquor store was a very popular Mexican restaurant, and the fortunate thing is that the police in the area very often eat at that restaurant. And right then, 3 cop cars pulled out of the restaurant onto the side road and pulled up between the liquor store and the gas station. Well, now the police were just stopping at a stop sign in order to turn onto the main road. They were not aware what was going on with me and the other car. But fortunately, seeing the 3 cars pull up must have convinced the 2 guys in the car to give up doing whatever they were trying to do. The car pulled away from me and then pulled out onto the main road. It sped away onto the main road. I was on edge for the rest of the walk home. I kept expecting the car to come back and for that guy to attack me with his friend or something, but fortunately, that did not happen. The walk home was nerve-wracking, but safe. All I can do from now on is carry something to protect myself going forward.
When I was in high school, I knew my parents' divorce was imminent. My mom was cheating on my dad, and my dad was cheating on my mom. I did everything I could to prevent my parents divorcing, but I knew it was a lost cause. My mother had been planning to leave him for a long time and eventually served him on my 17th birthday. They agreed to live under the same roof until I was out of high school, so I wouldn't have the stress of having 2 homes. When I was a little over 18, my mom had been consistently conversing with men on multiple dating apps. She even got an app that I was known to use called Kick Messenger. She fell asleep with the app open one night, and I'd seen that she was messaging a man named, I'm not sure if I'm going to use his name due to privacy concerns, obviously. I ignored it, but I'd known the name and seen the face multiple times on her cell phone. Fast forward maybe 2 months. My dad and I were just spending time together and wanted to go out somewhere to eat. His friend called him up that night. My dad has been known to be a social drinker who frequented local bars. He had many good friends that were bartenders and fellow social drinkers. His friend was at a local bar and met a man named AJ, who was looking for my father, by name, in order to buy a vehicle. My dad is a car sales manager, so we stopped by the bar that night because we thought we'd eat there. The bar isn't shabby, or the typical bar most would think of. We live in a small town and the bar was on the lake and people could rent lots to put their campers on it. It was like a club lodge. The man introduced himself as AJ. However, I recognized him immediately as the man who my mother had been conversing online with. I didn't say anything to my dad at first. I for sure thought he just looked similar and I was overreacting. That is, until he called me by my full name without anyone introducing him to me or even saying my name. He knew my first, middle, and last name. He also came up to greet me at the table I was sitting at. He tried getting me to open lotto tickets for him and was rubbing up against me and trying to touch my inner thighs. I was kind of frozen and didn't know what to do. He eventually left me alone after he saw people staring at him. I did what I knew I had to do. I googled his first name on Google and Facebook, and that's when I found out that he was a registered offender, ex-con in the bordering state over. I looked repeatedly from AJ to the man on my phone screen, and there was no doubt he was the same dude. He only lived about 30 minutes away from our own home. I pulled my dad to the side and told him that this man was not who he said he was. I showed him the picture and the information I'd found. I ran to the bathroom crying because I knew something bad was happening. He lied about his name, knew both me and my father's names, and knew where my father worked. After hearing this info, my dad refused to go outside with AJ. He made multiple attempts at getting my dad outside alone to take a look at my dad's truck, due to the fact he wanted something similar. He eventually stopped pushing my dad and went outside for a smoke. The manager at the bar immediately locked the doors and locked him outside, refusing to let him back in. Everyone in the bar, most of them were close friends of my dad, had seen how suspicious he was acting, and many had seen him rubbing up against me. The manager called the cops to report him. It didn't take long for him to figure out that he had been caught, and he attempted to leave the bar and drive away. My dad followed him up the road, trying to make sure he didn't get away. However, he was plastered and ended up crashing into the snowbank just up the road from the bar. He was caught by the police and charged with a DWI. He was jailed just 5 minutes up the road from home. I did not sleep a good night's sleep for about a month. If he knew my family as well as he seemed to, he probably knew where I lived. He was bailed out only 2 days after the incident. His vehicle had been found with duct tape, drugs, rope, a crowbar, and other materials in it when they impounded his car. He was also charged for violating his probation. He is a Tier 3 offender. He'd raped a minor with a deadly weapon and was required to register for life. He was not supposed to leave the state at the time of the incident, not supposed to have a Facebook or almost any form of social media where he could reach a minor, and was not allowed to even operate his vehicle due to his license being taken away. I also ended up pressing charges for sexual harassment as well as getting a restraining order against him. I also found out later through phone records and the police tracking his phone that he'd driven past my home more than 20 times in the week leading up to the incident. He had also been to my dad's job and my school multiple times throughout a period of 6 months. He'd been following both of us for a long time. I have never experienced something so crazy or scary in my life. I live in a completely different state, thousands of miles away now, thank God. But my family is still in that state that the incident happened. He still has yet to be charged or arrested with the harassment stalking charges, and probably never will be, seeing as if he comes back to the state, he can be arrested if he so much as gets pulled over because he has a warrant out for his arrest. Since then, I do not ever put my full name on any social media. I only put my first name except for things like Facebook. I've become a very paranoid person when it comes to my full name and my address or other personal info. Please everyone, be careful who you talk to on these dating sites. You never know who's behind the screen or what their true intentions are. And if you do find someone you like, investigate and do your homework. I lived in a town with a population of 5,000 and never once thought this kind of thing could happen to me.
Number 3. The Alley. I had an unusually bad night a while back. I was a bit emotionally shook up for relationship reasons. I also wasn't feeling too positive about myself. And although my job had been going pretty well, I found myself not putting the effort into it that I could have been doing. All this caused me to have problems with insomnia as well, and so on the night that this happened, I was absolutely having a really hard time sleeping. I was tossing and turning in bed for hours. I know that you're supposed to get up if you cannot fall asleep, and to try again later, but I always try too hard to force myself to sleep. I finally decided to get up and take a walk. It was warm outside, being in the middle of summer, but it was also a lot cooler after the sun had gone down. But mostly, it was really dark and really quiet outside. If you've ever taken one of those types of walks before, then you sort of know what I'm talking about. So I began walking through this really dark street. It's almost like an alley, but it's not really an alley, but there are not many lights there. But I walked up and down that street all the time. One of the things about this area is that a lot of people had dogs that they kept constantly in their backyards. They are mostly totally outside dogs. If I walked down the alley, the dogs were really used to me, so they would very rarely bark, if ever. But if I walked down the alley with someone the dogs did not know, they would get loud and they would bark a lot. This time, as I was walking and just enjoying how dark and quiet it was, I heard one of the dogs begin barking. It startled me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. And, as is always the case, it set off a chain reaction of dogs barking. I didn't really concern myself with what was going on, though. The dogs barked a lot, and dog barking at night was not really a big deal in this area. I even doubted that with the amount of dog barking in this neighborhood, that it was going to wake anybody up. My only thought was to get to the end of the alley so the dogs would stop. I knew I was passing by the backyard now of the dog that started the chain of barking, and just by chance I looked over at the house. There were no lights really, but that didn't stop me from seeing a dark figure at the back of the house. I froze when I noticed this figure, and it was quite obvious now that whoever it was, they were not supposed to be there. Not only that, but he was crouched down as if he was hiding. I assumed later that he was crouching down because he was afraid that the dogs would bring attention to him, and he didn't want to get caught. At the time, I wasn't thinking that the guy might have also noticed me walking by, and maybe that was why he was crouching down, and by stopping and looking at him, I may have blown my opportunity to just walk by safely. I don't know how long we stood there looking at each other. Each moment I was trying to decide what the best thing to do was. I could have just ran, and he might not have chased me. He may have decided I couldn't make out his features because he couldn't make out mine, so he was safe. But if I did that, what would keep him from continuing to break into the house? I am not sure how long it took me to finally do something, but when I did, I yelled out really loud for someone to get up and call the police, and right when I did, the figure pounced and ran in my direction. I was terrified, but he wasn't actually attacking me. The man just ran to the road and took off, thankfully, in the opposite direction that I had to go in. And strangely enough, no one actually seemed to wake up or call the police. I waited and watched, but nothing. So at that point, I decided just to make my way home. I was nervous the whole way there. Hell, I was nervous even after I got home. I had no idea who this guy was or if he had followed me home in the dark. So before going to bed, I made sure every door and window in my home was very secure, and even then, it was hard to go to sleep. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo Cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.